of the world. Who are our allies?
That's Cameron.
Now that's an interesting question because it seems like, well, that's obvious who our allies are. But it's not as simple as it once used to be. For example, Mr. Trump is questioning the value of NATO and whether that's an alliance that we should reevaluate. Not necessarily eliminate, certainly, but should we reevaluate what it means to be members of NATO? Financial contributions and others. Can we be trusted? These are questions that are being asked around the world in very serious ways. And I'd like to illustrate what I think kind of sets the table for the conference today through some examples that I've had personally. And I'll tell them very quickly. I could elaborate on them later, perhaps. But several years ago now, probably 2 years ago this summer, I spent some time in the Middle East. I was meeting with Prime Minister Danny Mountain. And he said something to me that I've always remembered and that I've heard again and again and again from various leaders around the world, and that is, we don't know if we can trust you any longer. We don't know for sure that you're going to stand by us. And we hear that in the Pacific Rim. We hear it from some of our allies in the Middle East. And I hear it in other parts of the world. Shortly after that, probably last summer, I think, I was in Tunisia. And I met with President El-Sisi, who is a good man. He's 89 years old now. And he walks into the room, and he doesn't speak very good English. But he says in English, before the meeting begins, he says, "I need your help. Will you please help us?" And then he started speaking through a translator and describing the situation, but he kept interrupting the translator and saying again in English, "We need your help. Will you please help us?" And he described how on his border with Libya, the insurgents were coming across, and what I didn't know at the time was that a large percentage of their foreign revenue comes through tourism. Well, for those of us here in America, we don't lay on the beaches of Tunisia very often. But it turns out a lot of Europeans do. And 5 days after we had that conversation with him, there was the attack in the museum, where there were, I believe, 27 tourists killed. And then, of course, last spring there was an attack on the beach where there was something like 37 tourists killed. And those people knew exactly what they were doing, and he knew that was going to happen. One other experience I'll share very quickly. About a month ago, I was on my way to China, and I stopped in Hawaii to meet with the Pacific Commander, General Willis, who's has enormous responsibilities. About a third of the military in the United States government falls under his command. And he made a point, and I think it's well said, if you think about the challenges that we're facing, he's asking, well, what's the greatest danger we face? What's the greatest threat we face? That's a question I'm asked all the time. And he elaborated on it, and I think this will come out in some conversations today. He said, the greatest danger we face is North Korea. Because we're dealing with an individual that we don't understand, and it's completely unpredictable, and maybe not mentally healthy. The greatest challenge that we face is China, because our relationship there is very complicated, and it has enormous implications for global relations. And then the only existential threat that we face is the Soviet Union. Actually, Russia, of course. We used to call it the Soviet Union. But they are the only nation that has the ability, or at least one of the few nations now, that has the ability as an adversary to actually destroy us. And I think that gives us a pretty good sense of the range and the scope of the challenges we have. They're complicated. They're dangerous, some of them. Some of them are even existential. And then the last thing I'll mention is that it isn't only about military. It isn't only about asking this question about what is the role of our military, what's the proper size of our military, how do we deploy our military. There's another completely different element to it that we'll be discussing in one of the panels later on, and that is recognizing that there is another very important role that the United States plays, and that's through NGOs, through religious institutions, through private individuals, and the good and the positive outcome that they can create in various places around the world. And again, we'll have a chance to talk about that in a little more detail. Before we go on and I introduce our first keynote speaker, I need to thank some people, and we'll be thanking them again. But some of the special guests that we had, Mr. Okoya, the DCM from the Japanese Embassy in Washington, D.C. Chris Harmer. Where did Chris go? There we go. Chris, who is a good friend of mine. You've seen him on Fox News, and I'll introduce him in a little more detail in just a moment. Some of our staff, let me mention very quickly, Chairman Nunes from the chairman of the Intelligence Committee was going to join us for a panel this morning. We had to shift our schedule around just a little bit. He's actually doing some other things here in the city that required while he's here. He'll be joining us in an hour or so. And then there are a number of panelists that we'll introduce individually once we go to those panels. But again, so many people have sacrificed their time, even at their own expense, to be with us today. We're very grateful to them. The Hinckley Institute, which helps to sponsor us, and for those of you who are going to enjoy lunch with us, they're ones who sponsor and finance that lunch and just give us the facility. And finally, members of my staff, all of them, but a couple in particular, and I don't know if they're here. If they are, I'm going to ask them to stand. They're probably outside still working. But Gordon Larson, my legislative director, Darren Fresnick, Ali Levitt, and Candace Perucci. Many of you have interacted with them, and they've put in many, many hours to make this possible for us. So thank you for joining us today. I'm sure it'll be worth your time. We look forward to your comments and your questions. All of the presenters and all of the panelists, we've asked that we reserve time for your questions and things that are on your mind. We look forward to that because we learn from you as well. We're going to get started. Chris, will you come up? This is a man whose heart is as big as his imposing presence. He and I used to play football together, right?
Yes.
You've seen him probably many times on national television. And I've left Chris's resume over there. He may elaborate on this. He is, tell me your position in the Institute for the Study of War.
Senior naval analyst at the Institute for the Study of War, senior military analyst.
Okay, and he's well published. I'm telling you, I've spent a lot of time with people in Washington, D.C., and frankly around the United States and around other parts of the world, who understand national security. But I've never spoken with anyone who I think has a better grasp of it, especially some of the more technical and more tactical aspects of it than Chris has, which is why he's in demand to speak on these issues, again, to a national audience. He has a 20-year naval officer. He flew helicopters, which tells you that he is indeed a real man, as a one helicopter guy to another. Not smart enough to fly the B-1, but he can fly helicopters. So. And we look forward to his comments because this is, again, someone who truly understands the depth and the breadth of the challenges that we're facing. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining us.
Appreciate it.
I think
I need to get a little feedback from there. Let's see if we get on this one. Test 1, 2. Yeah, there's a little less feedback on this, I think. Or is there too much? Can you hear me in the back if I speak without a mic?
No.
All right, we need a mic. Okay.
Hold that mic further from you.
All right, thank you.
Not quite so close to your mouth.
Not right up like this.
Right.
I can be trained, although my wife challenged that description. Thank you for your presence here today. There's so many things we can talk about with respect to America's role in the world. I've chosen to focus my subjects or my comments on the Islamic Republic of Iran and why I think this is one of the most rapidly changing threats that the United States of America faces. So what I'd like to do today is I'd like to spend about 20 minutes speaking to you, and then I'd like to leave as much time, 25 minutes for Q&A as possible. I know almost everything I can know about this subject. What I fail to understand or what I don't know is what the American people see. So I'm very interested in your comments, very interested in your concerns, very interested in what you think is the most important part. So we're going to go through, I'll do about 20 minutes on a slideshow. We'll save 25 minutes for Q&A. I'll start by talking about what the U.S. can't do. We're going to talk briefly about what the U.S. can do. We're going to talk about Iran as a state sponsor of terror, which is morphing into the first terrorist superpower. We've never seen this before, and that's a new development. Last, we're going to talk about the nuclear deal with Iran and how that facilitates terror, and what the U.S. should be doing to deter Iran. First, what the U.S. can't do. The U.S. cannot be the world's policeman. We want our allies to be self-sufficient. We don't want client states. We can't afford client states. The U.S. government's somewhere around $20 trillion in debt existing, somewhere around $100 trillion of unfunded liabilities. The Department of Defense budget is shrinking, so with those realities, we cannot intervene in every situation. What the U.S. can do is start by rejecting isolationism. At our best, the U.S. is a city on a hill. By show of hands, how many of you have ever heard that phrase from either President Reagan, President Kennedy, other politicians? Thank you. When I first heard that, it resonated with me. I loved that description of the United States. Through my historical studies, I realized that this was actually first uttered not by a politician, but by a pastor, John Winthrop, who was one of the founders of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630. He gathered a flock of his believers. They were headed to what was then colonial America, or even pre-colonial America. And his followers wanted to know, why are we going? What is the purpose of this land that we are going to? And he said that America would eventually become a model of Christian charity, and it would be an example to the rest of the world. Without going into the religious aspects of it, he simply said that America would be unique in the world, and that we would be uniquely positioned to do good in the world. I want to talk briefly about how the U.S. is exceptional in world history. That doesn't mean Americans are better than anybody else. It means that we have more advantages than anybody else. My friend Dr. Tom Evans here, he's a PhD in theoretical chemistry. I was talking to him briefly about how many Nobel Prize winners have come out of the United States. It's not because we're smarter than anybody else. It's because we have a system of intellectual inquiry that is free from government interference, and so we have the ability to generate all of this scientific knowledge. How does that translate to national security? World War I, World War II, Korean War, Cold War, the global war on terror. The U.S. helps our allies help themselves. Alliances are difficult but necessary. Representative Stewart talked briefly about NATO, about how important it is that we be part of these alliances where we can leverage what our friends bring to the table. I think it's fashionable right now to question the commitment of some of our allies. As Representative Stewart was talking about Tunisia, most Americans probably couldn't locate Tunisia on a map. I'm not saying that to be degrading. I'm simply saying there are a lot of countries in the world that face much greater threats than we do, and they want to be our friends. They want to be like us. They want to model their societies on American democracy. They want to be bastions of liberal tolerance, religiously, culturally, socially. They want to embrace free market capitalism. They can't do that unless someone helps them. If we do not help them, we will suffer more as a result in the long term. We must lead from the front. It's become fashionable to assume that we can pawn off our responsibilities onto other people. The real world doesn't work that way. Let's talk briefly about the Iranian regime. The people of Iran versus the Iranian regime. The people of Iran are not the problem. Historically, Persian culture is very different. We have a deep history there of Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, other religious minorities. The Iranian people are not the problem. The leadership of the Republic of Iran is the problem. It's no different than previous enemies. Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, Communist Russia. The people of those countries are not our enemies. Their dysfunctional political construct is. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the Islamic Republic of Iran. Let's talk about the Islamic Republic of Iran founding principles. 1979, the Shah was deposed. The Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, and today the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leaders. There are three organizing principles of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The first is internal cleansing to establish theocracy. The second is to conduct near jihad, unify all the Shia Muslims in the world underneath Iranian leadership. And then the last step is far jihad, the literal destruction of Israel. We talk so much about this, or we hear so much about it, I fear that the public has become desensitized. This is not a theoretical goal of the leadership of the Islamic Republic of Iran. It is an actual goal. They are working towards it. We'll talk briefly about the things they are doing. 1984, Iran is designated as a state sponsor of terror and a continuous designation ever since. So what is it that the Islamic Republic of Iran does that amounts to state sponsorship of terror? First, we've got internal suppression. The Iranian people have been brutally suppressed by their leadership. Second, sponsorship of foreign terrorist organizations. Third, sponsorship of foreign criminal networks, narco-terrorist networks in South America. get a significant amount of their financing and their money laundering through other foreign terrorist organizations such as Hezbollah. You look at these narco-criminal network enterprises in South and Central America. They're not jihadis, they're not Islamists, they don't have a political bent, they are just criminal organizations that in a Venn diagram of mutual interest join with terrorist organizations to do things like that. And then last, other state sponsors of terror and other state actors. So we started with the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini, who has since been replaced after his death by the Ayatollah Khamenei. They are technically not dictators. They are leaders of the Guardian Council, which is comprised of religious and legal experts, which provides a legal framework for the total control of society. The Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps is the Praetorian Guard of the Islamic Republic of Iran. They control virtually all of public life inside Iran. And much like the Waffen-SS during World War II, they have since moved into economic production. The Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the IRGC, is now the strongest power center in Iran. A number of experts, myself included, believe that Iran is gradually transforming from a religious theocracy to a military dictatorship that's only got the guise of a religious theocracy over it. Then the Basij militia, these are the volunteers that help the Islamic Republic of Iran suppress the internal people. As a practical matter, there is no functional opposition inside Iran. Probably some of us remember the Green Revolution 6 or 7 years ago that was brutally suppressed. Since that time, the regime imprisons, tortures, and executes anyone who challenges their leadership. Talk briefly about Iranian sponsorship of foreign terrorist organizations. The Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps is stationed in Iran, but conducts global activities. They don't get quite the same reputation as Al-Qaeda and ISIS because they're much more careful about the way they conduct their terrorist activities. They're much more subtle about it. They provide financing, they provide leadership, they provide equipment, they provide strategic planning for a number of other foreign terrorist organizations, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, Afghan militias in Syria, Shia militias in Iraq, the Houthi alliance in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza. There are 60 or 61 designated foreign terrorist organizations in the world right now. We could talk extensively about all of them. These are the primary ones that the Islamic Republic of Iran is focused on. Iran has extensive experience and relationship with the other two designated state sponsors of terror, Sudan and Syria. There are other state sponsors of terror that were previously listed that have been since removed, but Sudan, Syria, and Iran are the only currently designated state sponsors of terror. Other state actors, Russia and China. Representative Stewart talked briefly about the threats that each of those countries pose. They have extensive relationships with the Islamic Republic of Iran. During the comprehensive set of sanctions that we had in place against the Iranian oil industry, the Chinese actively assisted the Iranians in bypassing those sanctions. Russia actively exported top-end missile systems to Iran. Today, the S-300, which is the most advanced export surface-to-air missile system in the world, is being exported to Iran. There's a number of things that Iran is doing with North Korea. For example, the vast majority of Iran's ballistic missile program was developed in conjunction with North Korea, and we talked about the People's Republic of China and Russia. So why am I so interested in Iran? I believe that Iran is doing something that's never been accomplished before. Iran is morphing into a terrorist superpower. For the last 35 years, Iran has been a state sponsor of terror. They have sponsored foreign terrorist organizations. What we're seeing happening now is Iran is growing into a terrorist superpower, where the state itself conducts terrorist operations. The Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps does so. Then they sponsor other state sponsors of terror, as well as other foreign terrorist organizations. Iran conducts a full spectrum array of terrorist operations. The regime has total control internally, with legal, religious, and economic institutions all subordinate to the Guardian Council. Vertical control of economy and industry. I'm sure we have some successful businessmen here today, and I'm sure we all know that private ownership of enterprise results in a much more efficient operation of the economy. Unfortunately for us, vertical control of a state-owned enterprise results in a much more effective strategic ownership of resources. Iran uses its resources of the National Iranian Oil Company and the National Iranian Tanker Company, as well as the Islamic Republic of Iran shipping lines, to export terror and to finance all these terrorist networks. Finally, the Defense Industries Organization of Iran. More than any other nation in the world, the involved in terrorism, Iran has achieved a level of self-sufficiency in their military-industrial complex. Iran is now capable of producing virtually all of the military equipment they or their terrorist clients need. For the top-end issues that they can't produce, such as top-end fighter weapon systems, they are now buying those from both China and Russia. I want to talk briefly about the nuclear deal with Iran and how that facilitates terror. What did we get out of this nuclear deal with Iran? We got a marginal, temporary limit on uranium enrichment, in return for which the Iranians got immediate permanent sanction relief. Net impact is several $100 billion will flow to the Islamic Republic of Iran coffers. This legitimizes the Iranian regime. This legitimizes the Iranian nuclear program. This provides an immediate boost to Iran's terror partners. Hezbollah, Shia militia, Houthis, Hamas, they will all get their cut. Now, when this is complete, and we're about halfway through that process now, my expectation is Iran will then reject the deal that they entered into, and we will not be in a position to do anything short of actual combat with them, which we won't want to do at that time. This idea of being able to snap back sanctions into place is simply not realistic. It took decades of hard work to validate what the Islamic Republic of Iran was doing. In order to get these sanctions put in place in the first place, it's going to be very, very difficult and time-consuming to put them back in place. It's sort of like closing the barn door after the horse is already out. Syria and Sudan, the other two state sponsors of terror, they will also benefit from this windfall. All get a cut of cash from this Iranian deal. So how do we effectively deter Iran? First, let's clearly describe the issue. This is the Islamic Republic of Iran. The founding documents of the Islamic Republic of Iran call for jihad. They call for the literal destruction of Israel. This is not a theoretical problem. This is an actual problem. Iran is making preparations for this today. I will show you in a later slide how that's playing out in real life. There is no military in the world that is more capable on a man-for-man basis than the Israeli military. It doesn't matter how capable they are, they cannot survive a saturation attack. What the Islamic Republic of Iran is doing is surrounding Israel with weapons of mass destruction, short of the nuclear warheads. We need to clearly describe the problem, clearly understand the problem, reinstate comprehensive sanctions against Iran to reduce their ability to provide rockets and other equipment to Hezbollah and Hamas. Every time an Iranian-sourced rocket hits Israel, fired out of the Gaza Strip by Hamas, fired out of Lebanon by Hezbollah, fired out of the West Bank by Islamic Jihad, we should increase sanctions on Iran. We have the ability to reduce their economic potential or their economic capacity to support terror. We are not doing that. We are doing just the opposite. By relief of sanctions, we've increased their ability to sponsor these foreign terrorist organizations. I'm going to talk very briefly about the Shia versus Sunni divide, not so much the Shia versus Sunni divide, but why Iran feels that, or why the leadership of Iran feels that they are exceptional in the same way that we feel we are exceptional. Shiites as a percentage of global Muslim population, it's only about 15%. About 85% of Muslims in the world are Sunni, about 15% are Shia. I don't want to go into the religious differences, I just want to say that the Shiites are overwhelmingly concentrated in the Middle East. This green arc is what we call the Shia crescent. One of the goals of the Islamic Republic of Iran was to establish themselves as the unquestioned leader of the Shia alliance in the Middle East. They've done that. By doing that, they will position themselves to attack Israel. One of the realities of the Gulf Cooperation Council, that is the Peninsular Arabs, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Oman. These countries have all tacitly accepted the existence of Israel. Only Jordan and Egypt have formally signed a peace treaty recognizing the existence of Israel. But by military cooperation with the United States, the Gulf Arabs have tacitly accepted the existence of Israel. Iran makes the point very convincingly to global jihadists and Islamists that Iran is the only country in the world willing to take the fight to Israel on a state-based function. We have today, Lebanon, 70,000 rockets, 70,000 surface-to-surface rockets. 10 years ago, 2006, Hezbollah conducted what we consider to be a practice war against Israel. For 30 days, they shot hundreds of rockets every day. The Israeli Defense Forces did a good job of retaliating, but it's almost impossible to predict where these relatively small rockets are going to be fired from. In addition, Hezbollah used hospitals, mosques, schools, shopping centers. They would infiltrate these rockets into public faces, they would shoot at Israel from there. If Israel retaliates, they're going to cause civilian casualties, which is exactly what Hezbollah wants. Hezbollah wants Israel to maximize civilian casualties. That war ended. It was a 30-day war. Eventually, Iran won. But all that really was a dry run for the next attack, which would be much bigger, coordinated with Hamas in Gaza, coordinated with Islamic Jihad in the West Bank, and coordinated with Iran with their ballistic missiles. So Israel faces a threat today of 70,000 rockets. Not all of them can range all of Israel, but all of them can hit inside Israel. If you look at the next map, we see there's 12,000 rockets in Gaza. So between them, you've got somewhere between 80 and 100,000 rockets, depending on whose estimates you believe. They can all be fired at Israel. Israel is capable of intercepting some of them, but not all of them. There's a massive amount of conventional destruction that will take place if and when this conflict lights up. Iranian ballistic missiles. I talked briefly about rockets. These are short-range surface-to-surface rockets. Iran also has a much larger inventory of ballistic missiles. One of the real problems I have with the Iranian nuclear deal is that they promised they would reduce or stop or suspend or halt their research and development into ballistic missiles. They're not even bothering to pretend to comply with this requirement. Iran is test firing ballistic missiles on a regular basis. All of these will be able to hit Israel from any point in Iran. Finally, this is one just screenshot of the Segil ballistic missile. This is a high-grade, first-world equivalent intercontinental ballistic missile. This is it, an Iranian test firing from last year. Very briefly, I know this is probably too much technical detail, but I just want to say this is the crown jewel of the Iranian missile program. They've spent 30 years developing this. The missile is almost entirely indigenous, meaning they are not dependent on imported parts for it. The Defense Industries Organization of Iran can build everything they need to mass produce the Segil missile. It's a big frame. What that means is it will support multiple spiral developments. Representative Stewart flew the B-1 aircraft. That aircraft's been in existence now, I think, for 30 years. It's a big, heavy, strong aircraft. It can support multiple developments to the airframe. The Segil missile is the same thing. It's a big missile. It's heavy. It's long range. It's accurate. The Iranians can start piling on extra characteristics to this missile. It is a first strike weapon. I hate using all caps, but at this point I assume you're all asleep after listening to me for 15 minutes. This is a first strike weapon. This is a big weapon with multiple warheads. What I believe the Iranians are preparing to do, or what they are preparing to do, is beyond any doubt what they're preparing to do, is to conduct a saturation attack using short-range rockets, overwhelm the Israeli missile defenses, then bring in the Segil missile 15 minutes later as a knockout weapon. The Iranian nuclear facilities. Some of you may remember in 1981, the Israeli Air Force conducted a long-range strike against the single Iraqi nuclear reactor in Osirak. That was a brilliant strike, but it was a one-time deal. It took everything the Israeli Air Force had to get this strike off against the Osirak nuclear reactor. The Iranians learned from this. They have dispersed their nuclear program into multiple sites and buried them. The reality is the Israeli Air Force simply does not have the mass, does not have the range, does not have the top-end weaponry to conduct a strike against the Iranian nuclear program. The only people in the world who can deter the Iranian nuclear program, the only people in the world who can defeat the nuclear program, the United States of America. This is an issue where I believe we need to be consequentially engaged. It's a pithy saying, but an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We would be far better off preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon than trying to deal with it once it's a reality. This is a picture of the Israeli missile defense. They have a very effective missile defense, but the problem is every missile they shoot can only take down one inbound missile. If the Israelis have 1,000 defensive missiles and Iran and its partners have 90,000 offensive missiles, the Israelis may intercept every missile that the Iranians shoot, but still there's going to be 80 or 85,000 to get through. This is a literal conventional destruction of the entire state of Israel. Iran now is the first terrorist superpower in the world. What are they? They are the dominant regional power in the Middle East. They've established control of the Shia Crescent. They've successfully defined the Arab states as pro-US and pro-Israel. They are making preparations for the literal destruction of Israel. They are state sponsors of terror in Iran, Syria, and Sudan. They have successfully partnered with multiple terrorist organizations, Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad. They are preparing to launch a multi-front saturation attack combined with suicide bombers, rockets, and missiles. Conclusion. Iran is the first terrorist superpower. This is happening as we speak. Iran's ambition is not a secret. Every single leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran has talked about the literal destruction of Israel. We have a 36-year history of state-sponsored terrorism. It's not a secret what they do. It's not a secret what they want to do. They believe in full-spectrum terrorism. Anytime, any place, anyone, they have global reach. The most effective terrorist strategy in history. We look at Al-Qaeda, we look at ISIS, they get all the headlines, that's what they do. Iran is much more calculated about what they do, they're much more strategic. They are marrying the resources of a successful nation state with a massive industrial infrastructure and massive natural resources to get out terrorism throughout the world. Most unfortunately, I believe that Iran has desensitized the American people to the reality of what they're doing. Iran is using ISIS for cover. What I mean by that is Iran is piggybacking off of ISIS terrorist operations. ISIS does all these crazy things, these bizarre things, public beheadings, public executions, crucifixions, immolations, all kinds of just nasty, terrible things. We are rightly directed our anger against that. Iran is using that to build out their terrorist capability at the same time. If we do not prevent it, the current leadership of Iran will attack Israel. It's just a matter of time. Thank you for your attention. I'm ready for your comments and questions. Yes, sir.
Who is the strategic mastermind behind Iran's tactics and strategies?
General Qasem Soleimani. He's the leader of the Quds Force. One of the things, if you look back in history, 1980, 1988, 8 or 9 years, Iran and Iraq had a war. And while that was going on, we, in a short-sighted approach, said, well, as long as the Iranians and Iraqis are killing each other, they're not killing anybody else. That was true for the time. The unfortunate reality is through that 9 years of conventional warfare against Iraq, Iran developed a massive subset of strategic planners who had tactical operational experience, who understood global financing of terror. So all of these guys, there's an entire leadership cadre of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps who operate on the military side. There's an entire cadre of legal scholars who operate within the legal system. There's an entire cadre of religious scholars who justify what they're doing. They all work together. One of the advantages of a dictatorship or a theocracy like Iran is they can take a long-term strategic outlook and they can plan over decades and even a half century to accomplish their goals. We are tied to a 2-year election cycle. We think in terms of a 24-hour news cycle. That's very efficient when it comes to maximizing our economic performance. It's very inefficient when it comes to American national strategy. Yes, sir.
Who's the mastermind idiot here in the United States that's allowing this to continue? Why are we supporting
One of the best lessons I ever learned, I stayed out of staff work as long as I could. I flew 15 years in a row. It's very difficult to do, but eventually I got drafted into the Pentagon. My first day as a strategic planner, I had a great, absolutely phenomenal general, Marine Corps General Sadler, calls me into his office and says, I need to disabuse you of some notions. A lot of people outside of the Pentagon think there's a room of smart people in the Pentagon making decisions. There isn't. Okay, the way American national security policy works is there are thousands of inputs into the process. That's good from a perspective of democracy in action. It's bad from a perspective of sometimes those 1,000 inputs don't work together. So you've got a president who has the biggest say. You've got Congress who has a budgetary say. You've got professional diplomats in the State Department who work, who work beyond an administration point of view. You've got military professionals who shouldn't be politically oriented or who shouldn't be politically involved, but we have to consider them. So one of the strengths of America is everybody plays a role. One of the weaknesses is because everybody plays a role, sometimes our strategy is not very effective. That's why I think events like this are so important for national security leaders like Representative Stewart and Chairman Nunes, as well as interested citizens like yourself to get involved. Please, sir, there.
Are you sort of saying that Iranian people aren't the problem, the regime is? American people aren't the problem, but the regime is?
So I don't do domestic political analysis, but I'll simply say, I have some ancestors who were German. They were not the problem in World War II. Adolf Hitler never at his best. One election he got 32% of the vote. As soon as he got that, which was a plurality, not a majority, he immediately began killing off his opposition. The German people were never our enemy. The fascists of Germany were. The Japanese people were never our enemy. I lived in Japan for 3 years, absolutely loved it. Some of the nicest, kindest, friendliest, hardest working people I've ever met. I absolutely loved my time in Japan. The Japanese people were not our enemy. The Imperial Japan was. The Russian people were not our enemy. Communist regime of the Soviet Union was. The Iranian people were not our enemy. The Islamic Republic of Iran regime is. Yes, sir.
Yes. Could you contrast and compare the strengths and weaknesses and strategies of Saudi Arabia and Iran?
So, in terms of strategic comparison, the question is Saudi Arabia versus Iran. I have to moderate my comments here because Saudi Arabia is ostensibly an ally of the United States, but they are incredibly, extraordinarily ineffective at what they do. The reason is, you have to go back, the way Saudi society is structured, every direct male descendant of Ibn Saud, the first king of Saudi Arabia, is a prince of the royal family. There's about 6,000 of them. Ibn Saud had somewhere around 100 wives and concubines, somewhere around 600 sons, each of whom has had a bunch of sons. The problem Saudi Arabia has is they've got this massive royal family that sucks up a huge amount of their resources. It's not required to produce anything for the society at large. The way they get off with that, or the way they get away with that, is they buy off their strict clerics, the Wahhabi clerics of Sunni Islam. Because Saudi Arabia is the guardianship of Medina and Mecca, the birthplace of the Prophet Muhammad as well as his burial place, they get a pass on a lot of stuff. So what happens is the Saudis have cut a deal with us. They say we will export all our oil to, in this case now, Europe and the Pacific Rim, in return for which, America, you protect us. We have failed to live up to our moral obligation to require the Saudis to at least adopt some form of democratic reform. The Iranians look down on the Saudis because the Iranians say, you Saudis have sold your souls for a mess of pottage. You sold out to the Israelis in return for American protection and a fancy lifestyle. All these Iranian leaders, they are ascetics. They don't live high on the hog. They don't display their wealth. They live very frugally because they try to stay true to their religious roots of jihad. So strategically, there's no comparison. The Saudis are nowhere near the Iranians in terms of their ability to strategize and execute. Dr. Evans?
I find it troubling, I'm sure you can see that the Sentinel missile was developed as an indigenous weapon system during the time when pretty strict sanctions were in place. Can you speak to the implications of what their capabilities may be now that those sanctions aren't limiting their ability to develop these systems?
Yeah, thank you for that question. For probably most of you don't know, Dr. Tom Evans is a PhD in theoretical chemistry here from the University of Utah, one of the world experts on biological and chemical warfare. He doesn't go in the public eye the way I do, but I talk to him on a regular basis. He's one of the people I consult with to understand how they're making these advances so quickly. What Dr. Evans is saying is the Sejong missile was researched and developed almost entirely, well, it was developed entirely when we had a comprehensive set of sanctions in place against the Iranians. Now that the sanctions are off, what are the future developments in Iranian missile technology going to be? My expectation is they're going to rapidly increase. They're going to increase in size, scope, capability, accuracy, ability to defeat the Israeli missile defense systems, and if they can't defeat them, to overwhelm them with numbers. We used to say during the Cold War that America has quality better than the Russians. The Russians' response used to be, well, quantity has a quality all its own. The Iranians have embraced that approach. They are looking at Israel as a very small country geographically. They've got no fallback. They have no geographic protection. Their enemies are literally in their front yards. So when this attack comes, it will be a 2-minute warning. There won't be time to react. The Israeli missile defenses are going to get overwhelmed. We're going to see massive Israeli casualties as a result. And then the inevitable counterstrike from the Israelis. So the reason I'm talking to you about this now is I want to avoid a nuclear exchange in the Middle East. The best way to do that is to suppress the Iranian ability to export terrorism now. Yes, sir.
So a lot of this is what you said, that Iran is already prepared to launch this attack to destroy Israel, to wipe off the face of the earth. And the only ones that can defeat him, according to you, is the U.S. Okay? Are we prepared to do that? Can we get prepared, or what is your outlook?
So So restate the question is, thank you, sir. So the question is there anyone who can defeat or deter the Iranians except the United States? The answer is no. It's us or it's nobody. It's us or nobody else. The Israelis wanted to conduct a first strike against the Iranian nuclear program 10 years ago. We talked them out of it. And by we, I mean President Bush, President Obama. Everybody said, trust us, come with us, avoid a first strike against the Iranian nuclear program, and we will protect you. What the Israelis are afraid of, and what they are justifiably afraid of, is we are walking back on our commitment to them. Representative Stewart said it before, I'll say it again. Never since before World War II have our enemies feared us less, never have our allies trusted us less. It doesn't work unless our enemies fear us and our allies trust us. Right now, that fear and trust is in question. Yes, sir, gentleman with the style and mustache. I wish I could do that.
Thank you, sir. Okay, right now our policy is a lot of intervention, a lot of military action over there at different places. We're concerned with this and that going on. We're over there doing that. I think that there's at least one school of thought that says that what we're doing, the intervention we're doing, is causing some of the problem and some of the hatred and the animosity towards the U.S. We have, if you look historically, at least in the Middle East, okay, when we decided to go to Afghanistan, we destroyed the government and the military in a matter of days, or at least weeks, okay? And, and from my point of view, is what we did was we stayed, we tried some nation building and some other kind of stuff. We did the same thing in Iraq. When we decided to go, we went, we toppled the government and the military completely. And then we stayed and we tried to change their balance of power and do things like that. And do you not think that our staying there doing those things, then we enter into kind of a Vietnam scenario where they're at their home, they're pot shot.
So that's a valid concern, and the gentleman's question is it possible that our military intervention is causing more problems than it's solving? Are we creating more terrorists? To a certain extent, there's always going to be some truth to that. There were plenty of Germans during World War II who didn't hate America up until B-17s and B-24s started bombing them. But that's an inevitable outcome of nation versus nation conflict. In terms of all of these terrorist nation states, they have a jihadist outlook that has nothing to do with our existence or our non-existence. They have a military, philosophical, religious, theoretical approach to life. We just happen to be the only people opposing them. There are some people, I call them transactional terrorists, who eventually, or circumstantial, they enter into the equation only because they hate us, because we get involved. The vast majority of these people are going to do this whether we're involved or not. I refer you to, like I said, I don't do domestic political analysis, but I will quote President Obama on one thing. 2011, he said, "We are leaving behind an Iraq that is sovereign, stable, and self-reliant." At that moment in time, it was true. It was no longer true when we left, because the Iranians were able to fill the gap left by our presence. I don't want to occupy the world. I'd rather go fishing up the Pine View Reservoir. But as long as those evil people are out there, we have to prevent them from getting traction. Let me give you one very quick example. We got about 11 minutes left on my section here. 1950 to 1953, we successfully fought in the Korean War to a stalemate. We didn't defeat North Korea, but we didn't lose. So we established a line of demarcation, the demilitarized zone. It took us 35 years, from 1953 to 1988, to transition South Korea from a military dictatorship to a functional democracy. I've been in South Korea. It's very much a cosmopolitan, westernized. There's freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of media. The government is elected by the people. There's economic freedom. There's all the things that we believe are the foundation of Western civilization. South Korea has adopted. They were only able to adopt that because we bigfooted the problem for a half century. We tried to do it quick and cheap in Iraq. It didn't work. We tried to go in quick, defeat the enemy, establish a democracy, and leave before the roots of democracy had time to grow. So your point is valid. We have to be careful before we intervene. We've got to minimize civilian casualties. But most of all, we've got to be clear about why we are there and when we are going to leave. You, sir, here.
Donald Trump and other Republicans ran for president argue convincingly, I think, that Bush's invasion of Iraq destroyed the balance of power in the Middle East, that Saddam Hussein was an effective check not only on Islamic terrorists in his own country, but on the influence of Iran, who since built balance of power and become this regional hegemon.
So the gentleman's question is, there was a balance of power in the Middle East, the invasion of Iraq destroyed that balance of power. The new balance of power is Iran is essentially unchecked by any nation states. There are very few strategic issues where there's a clear yes and a clear no and a 100% answer and a 0% answer. I agree with some of the premise of your question, I disagree with other parts of the premise. I'd simply say Saddam Hussein was himself a state sponsor of terror. He used weapons of mass destruction against the Kurds. He brutally suppressed the Shia. He ennobled the Iranian approach. I mean, he did a lot of bad stuff, not to even dismiss the invasion of Kuwait, launching missiles against Saudi Arabia. The closest we came to nuclear war in the Middle East was when that knucklehead was rifle firing Scuds into Tel Aviv. It took everything that George Bush Sr. had, a man of unquestioned credibility who was the youngest naval aviator in the history. At age 18, he earned his wings of gold, fought in World War II. It took everything that George Bush Sr., a man of unquestioned military integrity, Colin Powell, Norman Schwarzkopf, Baker, all those Cold War guys, it took everything they had to convince the Israelis don't launch a nuclear attack against Iraq. So there are some specific points where I agree that yes, our premature withdrawal from Iraq completely destroyed the balance of power and allowed Iran to move in. I don't agree with the point that, so the balance of power argument works as long as the entirety of the construct is working in a positive direction. And I think the balance of power between Iraq and Iraq was moving in a negative direction. So in the back, gentlemen in the red tie.
Thank you. It appears our military has been degraded over the last decade.
It's not an appearance, that's the reality.
Okay. If and when we rebuild our military, we begin to rebuild it, what impact will it have on the actions of other countries? Iran, Russia, China. How are they going to react to that?
So the most effective way to defeat a bully is to stand up to him. The most effective way to avoid war is to be prepared for it. The most certain way to invite conflict is to not be prepared for it. I had a friend of mine, well-intentioned, completely naive. He's saying, well, what do we care if Russia invades Crimea? What do we care if Putin takes over Ukraine? What do we care? I mean, the Newt Gingrich, who used to be a principled man, is now just a moth to the spotlight, says that we should cast off the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, because they're not really members of NATO anyways. That's an open invitation to a guy like Vladimir Putin to invade. That's the exact argument. The exact argument was made in 1938. Isolationist Americans saying, well, we should ignore the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia because they're ethnic Germans anyways. What do we care if Germany annexes Austria? What do we care if Germany annexes Sudetenland? We should care because allowing that dysfunctional, counterproductive behavior, we encourage more of it. So the best way to avoid the conflict is to A, have a set of moral principles that we govern ourselves by, and B, have a military that's ready to defend those principles. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Seems that the question we're not addressing, that hasn't been addressed, is the philosophy that's led to the appeasement of Iran. Because John Kerry himself said we're giving this money back, and we know some of it's going to go to terrorism. So what is it that U.S. current leadership believes is the real issue that they would allow that to go on?
I have, so the question is, why does current U.S. leadership not, thank you, sorry. Why does current U.S. leadership not understand what the Iranians are doing? I have no way of analyzing why politicians make the decisions they do. I understand they have considerations that I don't have. I'm just a guy, analyzing the situation. But I believe absolutely that American policy right now is counterproductive, immoral, and guaranteed to lead to conflict in the future. Yes, ma'am.
What's the advantage for Iran supporting narco-terrorism?
So the question is, what is the advantage to Iran of supporting narco-terrorism? Number one, it's a chance to hit us. Iran doesn't dare to attack us directly. In the late 1980s, the Iranian Navy tangled with the U.S. Navy on several occasions. We smoke-checked them pretty good. The Iranians know they can't go head-to-head with us. So how do they hurt America? And keep in mind, both of the Ayatollahs, all of the leaders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the Quds Force, the Basij militia, all of these Iranian leadership have continuously referred to the U.S. as the Great Satan. They don't really care about us, except for the fact that we're allied with Israel. They vaguely hate the fact that we're westernized, that we allow women to drive, that's a big no-no, that we have, all these things that they hate about us, yes, they mostly hate the fact that we protect Israel. They refer to us as the great Satan, that's not theoretical, that's actual, they actually believe that we are the embodiment of evil. In the same way that the American founding fathers believed that the United States was the embodiment of God's will on earth through the Constitution and Declaration of Independence that said we are endowed by our Creator. The Iranian leadership believes that America is the great Satan, the exact opposite of that. So their support of narco-terrorist networks allows for them to further degrade American society through the proliferation of hard drugs, and it allows them to build partnerships of convenience in South America that they then use to, for example, blow up the Jewish embassy in Buenos Aires. The Iranians can't get from Tehran to Buenos Aires to kill Jews. Narco-terrorists in South America can. The Iranians pay off those narco-terrorists, then they facilitate that terrorist attack for them. Do we have any more? I want to get some women here, please. I see all the women looking, and you're not asking questions, so we've got 3 more minutes, and all women from this point on.
So my question is back to the missile in Iran. They were able to build that under U.S. sanctions anyway. Was that time and resources better spent to fortify Israel from an attack and help protect them rather than being suppressed when it wasn't really working in the first place?
So the question is, if the Iranians were able to build a Sedgwick missile, even when we had sanctions in place, why not just fortify Israel against the attack? And the reason is, if you look at the history of warfare, offensive weapons against defensive weapons always win. It's just a matter of time. If you look back to the English history with the longbow, I have forgotten my medieval history when the English defeated the invading French with the longbow through the armor. The offensive weapon will always defeat the defensive weapon. You have to defeat the offensive weapon before it launches. Any other women? We need some. There we go. Yes, ma'am.
I loved your slide on what the U.S. can do. It does seem to be the antithesis of what one of our presidential candidates stands for. I'm curious what you think our relationship with Iran would look like under a Trump presidency versus under a Clinton presidency.
So, if anybody here can decipher what Donald Trump thinks or believes, I'm all ears. So, like I said, I don't do domestic political analysis. I'm on the record as opposing his presidency because unpredictability to a certain extent is good when you're talking with your enemies. It's extraordinarily bad when you're talking about your allies and what your actual principles are. I think it would embolden them, but I don't know. I mean, I know for a fact that there was this image of George W. Bush as a bit of a cowboy, and the Iranians did respond from our perspective positively to that, in that they did not want to tweak us at all because they thought this guy had a hair trigger. Maybe President Trump has that same effect on Iran. Maybe he has a different. I have no idea how to help. Any more women? Yes, ma'am. Excellent.
You speak about this missile that hit Israel.
Yes.
And I'm assuming that it would destroy a great part of that. My question is do we or would we or will we have the ability to help at that time? Or are we going to wait until they're all dead and then say, oh, well, it's already happened?
We currently have the ability. We are reducing our ability. So what this lady talked about, the defensive capability, we have largely financed the Israeli missile defense program, in return for which we get all the technology that they develop. The Israeli engineers are extraordinarily good. So we benefit from that. And we station ballistic missile defense ships in the Eastern Mediterranean, U.S. Navy ships that have very accurate radar. So there's a lot of stuff we can do to protect Israel. But that's fiddling around the margin, okay? It's like, if you've got a raging horde coming into the neighborhood, having a security system that tells you they're coming isn't going to do you any good. Okay, we know they're coming. We know what they're doing. They're not making a mystery of it. The problem needs to be stopped before it goes. Okay, so this is the last question. My time is up. And yes, ma'am, you. Yeah.
So, if I understand correctly, what you're saying is carry the stick or use it?
Yes, the question is, we carry a big stick or use it, and that's exactly the point. You have to be well armed. You have to be credible. And if right now, because we're less well armed and less credible, our enemies are taking advantage of that, which is forcing us to a position we don't want to be in, which is requiring us to use that big stick. Thank you very much for, very last question. This is it.
Thank you. I think it's really important. Just tell us very quickly what you feel this all has, what the effect is here at home on the United States and the militant jihadists that are actually here. how,
If you look at how many Muslims in America, 6 to 8 million, less than 1% of them have had anything to do with jihadism, probably more like 1/10 of 1%. Our strength is our ability to assimilate people into our culture. Like some of my ancestors were German. They ditched their alliance, or they ditched their support for Germany and became Americans. Some of my best friends are Muslim Americans. That's how we're going to defeat it. I'm a white kid from Battlefield, Utah. I can't tell you what these guys are thinking. My Muslim friends who are Americans, they can. They're more valuable in the war on terror than I am. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Chris Homer, right? It's obvious. I think it's obvious from his presentation why we were so excited and grateful you came to be with us today, Chris. And he's going to join us on the panel in just a few minutes, and we'll have a chance to, because I know there's some of you who still have more questions. I met with Jack King in the last 2 or 3 weeks, who was a retired 4-star general, the vice chairman. He happens to be Chris's boss at the Institute for the Study of War. And as we were having this breakfast together, he kept saying things, and I said, that sounds like Chris. It sounds like Chris. And I mentioned that to him, and I said, you obviously spend a little time together. And he said, Chris is one of the finest and one of the most strategic thinkers that I've ever met. And I think that's absolutely the case. And look, did you get the sense that there wasn't any question you couldn't ask, that you wouldn't have some input to? So Chris, thank you so much for being with us. We pondered what we could give our keynote speakers and others today. I thought of giving them perhaps, a signed picture of me, right? That was, turns out staff didn't think that was such a great idea. I thought of giving them cash, but we don't have any. I wanted to give something kind of personal. So Chris, we have for you a copy of one of my books, 7 Tipping Points That Saved the World, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We are going to take a few minutes break. We're bringing on Dr. Who is it? I'll get to that in just a minute. We're bringing on some individuals who are actually in Israel right now, and bringing them in on Skype, putting the panel together. So 10 minutes here, and we'll reconvene. Thank you.